Welcome, my friends, to Pop Culture Fridays. I'm your host, as always, Troy. This week, we're talking about Mulholland Drive Explained, or I'll try to explain it anyway. David Lynch said that he wants everybody to bring their own interpretation to this, and that's what's going to happen here. But I think one thing that makes this different than other Mulholland Drive Explained videos is that I'm actually going to give you several different theories and then sort of share with you my interpretation of what I think is going on here. Now, the risk of doing something like this is alienating people who haven't seen the film, which I understand because there are going to be spoilers. However, the movie's 19 years old, so if you haven't seen it by now, maybe you need something to help entice or persuade you to see this film. This could be that thing. Besides, I think once we get to the very end and I can tell you what I think this film is about in one short sentence, I think it's something that everybody can relate to or at least understands, so I don't think you need to have seen this film to make that correlation. So I'll be as clear and concise as I can, given that David Lynch is a brilliant man and he gets a little bizarre sometimes, but I'll try to be as unbizarre as I can, but strap yourself in, sunshine, because shit's gonna have to get a little bit weird. So let's start off with the first theory about what this film is about, because I think it's gonna lay the groundwork for all the theories. So there are three things, or a couple of things, that I think are super important to understand right off the bat. The first thing is that I think there are basically three characters in this film. Diane, played by Naomi Watts, Camilla, played by Laura Harring, and then Hollywood itself. Those are the three main characters. The other thing to remember, at least for this theory, is that there are basically two parts to this film. I think there are two separate films, sort of, going on here. We'll just call them Part A and Part B. Part A is the first 2/3 of the film, and Part B is the last third of the film. Part B, in my opinion, is the real story. At least, in some, again, we're talking about other theories that I'm sort of opining about. But Part B is the real story here, and it starts about 2/3 into the film, which is a weird thing to do, but this is David Lynch. So here's the rundown of Part B. Naomi Watts' character, Diane, is an ex-lover of Camilla, played by Laura Harring, and they're both actresses. Diane is, from her own perspective, a failed actress. Camilla was successful. A lot of things happen that imply that Camilla may have slept her way up to the top because she ends up sort of being with a really big time director, whereas Diane was continuously passed up, or she didn't get her chance, she didn't get those callbacks. So now she's someone who's lost a lover that she cannot get over emotionally, and she also can't get over what she perceives as a lack of success in her career, being an actress, being a celebrity, whatever it is. She put the success or failure of being an actress and being a celebrity and being all those things, she put that over her own happiness, and now she's in a boat where she has neither of them. So as the famous Ryan Krauss of Cold Case Murder Files might say, evolution has to take over here. You have someone who can't deal with something emotionally, like Diane. She can't deal with losing Camilla and her career. Something's got to give. So what happens? Diane hires a hitman to kill Camilla. Now, when she meets with the hitman in the diner in Winky's Donuts, the hitman hands her a blue key, or he shows her a blue key and says, this is my calling card. When you receive this key, I don't know if he dropped it on her doorstep or in her mailbox or whatever, that's when you know the deed is done. And of course, later, we see in Diane's sort of terrible apartment with the shades drawn and the depression and the emotional problems and everything, you do see a shot of the blue key on the coffee table. So, as best I can tell, Camilla's dead. So to end the movie, at the end of Part B, we see Diane kill herself. That's basically what happens. Now, what's interesting is that even though it's the end of the movie and apparently the end of Diane, it's really kind of just the beginning of this story, because it makes you wonder what Part A was. I mean, what was it? Well, I think what it was, Part A, is Diane's fantasy of how her life should have been. So she becomes like a successful actress. She shows up in LAX right at the beginning of the movie. She's got stars in her eyes. She wants to make it. And, she does eventually have a killer audition. Look at me. But she is living out this fantasy. That's what it is, Part A. I think it's a fantasy or a dream or some sort of delusion. I don't know what the difference between a delusion and a fantasy are, but Part A is basically Diane playing in her mind the life that she should have had. what happens in part A at the beginning, the thing that starts off the whole movie, is that Camilla, who's now playing the character of Rita in Diane's fantasy, and Diane has another name too, it's called Betty, her name's Betty, and Camilla, who is now Rita, actually survives the hit from part B, if that makes sense. Remember when I told you she was supposed to be killed by a hitman? Well, in Diane's fantasy, she survives, but she has amnesia, which is perfect for this fantasy because then she can shape Rita, and she doesn't remember she broke up with Diane, she doesn't remember anything about that, so now she's in complete control of this fantasy, and they're together, and the acting thing is going well for Betty, who's actually Diane, and this whole little fantasy of how her life should have been plays out perfectly. However, dreams come to an end, my friend, as they do. So what happens is there's a breaking point in between part A and part B. And once we leave part A, we return to the real story, which is Diane being left by Camilla and not having a failed career and then eventually killing herself. But what's the breaking point? What divides part A and part B? This is where I think other theories might come into play, particularly mine. But let's just say that there's a blue box involved. Now remember that blue key I told you about that the hitman showed Diane? You'll get this blue key when the deed is done. Well, Diane also brings a blue box into her fantasy for the first half of part A, or for the first 2/3 of the movie. And so when Betty and Rita are playing this little detective game of figuring out her past, Rita's past, because she's got amnesia, remember, they find a blue box and then they get the blue key, and now the mystery is almost solved. They think something key is in that blue box. And what happens? Rita opens the blue box after they spend an evening at a theater performance at Silencio, I think it's called. And she takes the blue key, puts it in the blue box, opens it. As soon as she opens it, the camera goes into the box, darkness, the box drops to the floor, and I think that's the point where the real story takes back over, because if the box drops, that means Camilla's not there anymore, or Rita's not there anymore. She turns into Camilla, who's actually dead from the hit. You're welcome. So that's what divides part A from part B. Now, there are lots of things that support that theory. For example, at the end, when Diane kills herself, at the end of part B, she's terrorized by an elderly couple. This elderly couple is, to make a long story short, there's a kind of a monster that hangs out behind Winky Donuts where she hired the hit, and it has the blue box, and it drops it on the ground. And I think that sort of hobo monster thing is actually maybe a foreshadowing of Diane if she doesn't kill herself. She's homeless, she doesn't have a lover, she doesn't have a career, she's on the streets, Skid Row, things like that. Anyway, this hobo monster has the blue box, the famous blue box, drops it on the ground, and two little 1-inch old people run out of it like a supernatural thriller. And they run straight to Diane's apartment, run under her door because they're only like an inch tall. And then when they get on the other side, they pop up, terrorize her like they're going to get her. She runs into her bedroom, grabs a gun from her drawer, and kills herself. By the way, just quick little side note here. When Diane opens that drawer to kill herself to get that gun, you see there's a blue box next to the gun. Just saying. Anyway, this old couple that terrorizes her, they actually appear in the fantasy in the first part. You can see them at the beginning when the opening scene when they have that dance contest that Diane or Betty wins, and the old couple's like kind of hugging her, or like I don't know if they were judges or her grandparents or whatever, but then they appear again when she arrives in LAX. She's like got them under their arm, and they all go their separate ways once they get cabs, but they're there. So it's interesting, things like that keep popping up where there are characters in the real story in part B that play out in the fantasy of part A, even though they might have a different role. So there's one other thing I want to mention about supporting the evidence that part B is the real story and part A is the fantasy, is that the night that they go, when they open the blue box, before that, they go to this theater, I think it's called Silencio, and they see this play, and there's this MC guy who's out there, and he's like, oh, life is an illusion, it's an illusion, man. Well, at that moment, when he says it's an illusion, Betty starts to shake uncontrollably, and Rita consoles her and calms her down. But the reason that she's shaking, apparently, or it seems like a likely thing, is that she knows that the illusion is coming to an end, that night Rita's going to open that blue box and everything's going to go back. I thought it was a pretty interesting moment. This also leads me into the second theory, which is at Silencio. Are we ready for the second theory? Should there be an announcement? Second theory, here we go. Interesting that when they're at Silencio, there is a woman with blue hair there, and she appears at the end. She says Silencio over and over again. Blue being like the common theme that Diane associates with death. Blue key, blue box, blue hair, blue apron. I wish they were, Bluetooth or I don't know, whatever. Anyway, there's a theory that that woman with the blue hair is a playwright, and this whole thing we're seeing didn't actually happen. It's just a play that played out on stage, and she's watching her play out with all the characters and themes and everything. Pretty interesting theory. That's all there is to it, but I thought it was pretty interesting. Another thing that plays into this idea is that, and this is sort of, we're starting into Troy's interpretation of what this is. Of course, you start to bring weird aliens or time travel into it. But there's the idea that struck me was that, okay, if part A and part B exist, two parts, one's real, one's a fantasy, there are two possibilities of alternate explanations for this. One, it could be some sort of a weird purgatory where she just plays out this fantasy where she keeps reliving her own death and keeps reliving her own fantasies because she can't deal with what happened in real life, whatever keeps you in purgatory. So you have to keep experiencing these things, and it's like Groundhog Day. Over and over again, you're experiencing these same things. It sounds so terrible. And I don't know what you're supposed to get from it or how you're supposed to get out of it, but that's one idea. The other idea and this is the last theory, this is the last thing that I sort of thought was possible from this, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be the blue box that divides everything, because the blue box could just be the end of the first story, and part B could just be its own story, that they're their own stories, and that at some point, whether it's before the movie even started or it's during the movie, that this sort of multiverse theory, you knew I was going to say multiverse, didn't you, bitch? You knew it. This multiverse theory, I think it's multiverse where every decision you make, there's an opposite you for the other decision. So let's say you decide you want to go to South Dakota. Well, that's you, but there's a you that didn't go. So there's another strand or another parallel universe, and that person is still you, but it's a different you experiencing different things. So it's like parallel strands of time. You're living there's another you living that life who said no to whatever, a certain dinner, or I don't know if it's big things or every little thing, but that's the idea. So what I think is happening is that you've got two clear stories, A and B, and they both could be happening in some sort of reality, in some sort of universe, but they're running parallel to each other, and we just happen to see a glimpse of both of them. Possible. No matter what, however, this is the clinker, or the point of all of this, which is, I think for all of them, I think there's pretty much one overarching message being sent to us, and it's this. I think this film, going back to what I said, Hollywood being a character itself, I think this film is a critique of how Hollywood uses and abuses and then just throws away actresses. We only ever hear about the celebrities that make it when we see them in films or we see them in TV shows or whatever. And I'm specifically talking about actresses. I could be talking about actors as well. But you have things like Harvey Weinstein or other things where you have nepotism. In this movie, they sort of portray this all-powerful character who decides he wants a certain character cast in a role by the famous filmmaker that ends up marrying or being engaged to Camilla. So those sort of things where you have people who are connected, so to speak, or you have Hollywood characters, the underbelly of Hollywood, sort of predetermining who gets selected, who gets that crown, who gets everything. It's not based on merit necessarily, it's based on actions or sexual favors or nepotism or whatever it is. But you never hear about the stories really like Diane. someone who put all their hopes and dreams. They came from far away to try to make it. They put all their hopes into this idea that they could do this acting thing, or that they could be a celebrity, or that they could be on stage, or work with other great people, or direct things, or whatever it is. That those people are human beings with emotions and stories and histories and families, and the short existence that we have here sort of comes into play in how fragile people are. You look at Diane, who was, in her fantasy, she had so much hope for herself. She wanted to be, she wasn't asking for something greedy. She just wanted to be recognized and be appreciated and be valued and have love. And then you look at the Diane in the last half or last third, with depression and hating herself and not being able to get over her problems emotionally with her ex Camilla and all that. Those things pay a price, and the people sometimes, I'm not condemning all of Hollywood here, but I'm just saying, like, I don't like it, but I think the idea of this movie, the point of this movie, is that idea that Hollywood, or it's a look at how Hollywood sort of uses and discards Hollywood actresses. I think that's what it is. Of course, this is David Lynch, so you never know. If you have something you want to say, you think that's a dumb idea, or you think these theories are crazy or crackpot, let me know. Send me a message, or send me an email, or leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your theory. Everybody brings their own theory to the table, as David Lynch said. He wants that to happen. So let's hear it. Don't just sit back and passively take this dumb podcast or any other podcast telling you what they think it is. Let's hear what you have to say. And if you want to keep this conversation going on social media, you can find me at Culture Fridays on Twitter, at Pop Culture Fridays on Instagram. You can go to thisiswhereyouarenow.com and send me a message. All kinds of places to send me lots of lovely things. Well, that's it for this week, folks. I hope you're good. I hope you're safe. I hope you're taking care of yourself. Be well. Make sure you do the things that keep you healthy. Take those vitamins. Whatever you got to do. Just stay strong. And I will see you next week.